Okay. Hello, BookTube. Well, as you can see, I once again have a guest. I am Little Miss Popularity this week, once again. This is Jared Henderson from the BookTube channel, or the YouTube channel, Jared Henderson. BookTube, sometimes, quite often, you verge into bookish subjects. Yes?
Mhm. Yeah, yeah,
In
yeah, yeah.
fact, just
I don't
recently,
oh, I
Jared made a bookish video that you're all going to want to go and see on how to
That's
read
true.
difficult
I don't
books.
yeah, I don't call myself a booktube channel, mostly because I don't take part in the kind of social aspects of booktube very much. So I feel like I that's why I don't call myself that, but I talk about books all the time. In fact, basically, if I have a video ever do well, it's about books or it's about journaling. Those seem to be the only 2 topics that I'm capable of talking about. And yeah, so I just released a video on how to read difficult books and understand them, how to read and understand them. I think it was a good video because none of the thoughts were original to me. Every single one of them was cribbed shamelessly from Mortimer Adler's book.
And oddly enough, the example book that you chose was Why Orwell Matters by Christopher Hitchens. Why on earth would you pick such a thing? Is it just that
Well,
you
I
think a lot
actually
of your viewers would know Hitchens and Orwell?
yeah, so actually so that was a big part of it. The first time I tried to record that video, I actually started recording it, I used the Leszek Kolakowski book, Main Currents of Marxism, for all of my examples, and I got a little worried that the video would become like, the comments would be people being freaked out by the Kolakowski book a lot, so I did still mention it and used it as an example, and then I thought, "Well, let me just grab another book on my shelf," and I looked behind me and I saw the Hitchens book, sitting on top of a stack of Orwell novels, and so I grabbed that. That was the
It's,
whole thought for the
it's
example.
got good name recognition. Everybody knows Orwell's name. And the entire internet, the entire aspect of YouTube was created by Christopher Hitchens, I believe. It all arose from him.
Yeah,
From people going down Hitchens
yeah.
rabbit holes, whether they end up coming out of those rabbit holes pure evil or pure good. It's still that's the one thing they have in common is him. He's, I think, in the DNA of YouTube. Uh,
Absolutely. The irony of the video ends up being, though, that I talk about how to read difficult books, and I would not call Hitchens's book actually that difficult. It was just a an example book that I had with me, but you could still learn like the ideas. The ideas I think still came through. But I admit someone else pointed this out. It's like Hitchens's book isn't hard, and I'm like, yeah, that's a good point. That's a
no,
good
it's not. You can't write a hard book if you fart it out in half an hour. but but
point.
uh, there was an element in your discussion of how to read hard books. There was an element that was largely missing, and
Mhm.
I think you're aware. I don't think you'd object to me saying that, or I don't think you'd argue that it was, and that a large part of the implication of your video. I'll leave a link to the video down below so you can all go and see what I'm talking about. But I thought a large part of the implication of it brought it into line with the way that BroTube talks about reading, which is only about value extraction and
Mm.
not about enjoyment. I
Mhm.
think that most BroTubers who talk about books, and they regularly do, at least one video a month from every one of them is about books. But I think if they said, sometimes I just like to read this book because I enjoy it, they would be crucified in their own comment section as a soy boy cuck because that's not building your empire.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Yeah. Um, I do okay, so I do understand the point there. There is one big difference. The kinds of books that I was talking about, like that Kolakowski book, just 750,000 page volume of the development of Marxist thought, um, uh, um, isn't the kind of book they would ever read because they want to extract value that they can get, they can implement into their business empire. So they want to read a book that's about how to make better cold calls or how to change your mindset so that you can make your first million, right? So while I do think that there was sort of some that one of there was a assumption there, which is like let's get value out of the books, let's get the most out of the books that we can read. The kind of value is a little bit different. I'm talking about a kind of like intellectual, ideally life enriching value, and they're talking about one that should lead to material success, um, and exclusively that. But it does ignore the idea that you could just read a book for fun, or you
Right,
could just
right.
read a book because it's interesting.
Right. I mean, I'm not meaning to pick on my guest, but in both the cases that you're talking about, you are talking about extracting value. You're talking about putting the book in some sort of 19th century horse harness and making it work for you somehow.
Yeah, yeah.
Would I be wrong?
Which is also what Adler does in the book that I kind of base that on. That's
Yes, he
kind of how
does.
Adler
That's
approaches
why
it.
I've never mentioned the book on my channel. But would I be wrong in saying that 90% of the reading that you do, you don't put a harness on it at all?
Yeah,
Would it be
I
wrong
think
for
that's a
me
big
to
part of it.
assume that 90% of the reading that most people do is not in harness at all? They're not
Well,
looking
I
to
think 90% of the people who call themselves readers, probably it's not in a harness at all. It's just for fun. Um, and I would say the majority of my reading is like this. In fact, this often comes up. People will say, "So how do you take notes about the science fiction that you read?" And my answer is, I don't take notes about the science fiction that I that I read. The only notes I take sometimes with those are I write down character names, and this is for any novel because I'm really bad at remembering character names. So that's the extent of it, right? So huge amounts of this. I was reading a science fiction novel last night before I went to bed, and that was I'm not taking a single note about that book.
Might I ask?
What the book was? Oh, the book is the book was another installment in Christopher Rocchio's Sun Eater
Ah,
series. Yeah,
okay.
yeah, which are the kinds of books you could reasonably take notes on if you were trying to really understand the world building or something. But I've just been reading it for pure fun, just pure fun.
So you're science fiction for pure fun. So you're not joining in with Dr. November? You're not reading The Spy Who Came In From the Cold?
No, because
Maybe
I put a
very
bunch
long
of
to
books
do.
of mine. I put a bunch of books of mine into storage because we're gonna move soon, and I put all of my Le Carre novels
Oh,
into stores. So so I can't read them because I'm not fully digital yet. If I were truly fully digital, maybe I would just pull it up on my Kindle. But
I haven't. It's a very short book, so I haven't been sticking monastically to it. I've been wandering all around Le Carre and enjoying the heck out of it. Enjoying the heck out of it. Although it's had a disastrous side effect because I've also been reading other espionage authors, and I don't know. It might just be that I'm in a Le Carre frame of mind these days, but he seems orders of magnitude better. Not just a little
yeah,
better. Just it seems like why read anybody else if you have him to
yeah,
read,
yeah.
which is not a good
I,
attitude to
I
have. Eesh.
I'm not super familiar with lots of espionage fiction. When I have read Le Carre, though, I've just been kind of you feel like you're in the presence of a master, and clearly it is there. And so that I kind of wonder if you were trying to introduce someone to espionage fiction, would you give them someone else first? Because you're like, if I give them Le Carre, then they're going to be ruined.
I don't think so. No, I think if I were at this point, I mean, probably next year I would say something different. Last year I might have said something different, but right now I would say the best possible introduction to espionage fiction is to read The Spy Who Came In From the Cold, take a day off, and then immediately reread The Spy Who Came In From the Cold. It won't be the same book at all for you. It changes drastically. A reread changes things drastically. So that'd be my two-step plan. If somebody wanted to do that, I would no longer recommend the Rachel Papers or Eye of the Needle or London Set or anything like that. I wouldn't recommend Len Dayton or Ken Follett or anybody. I would just say read The Spy Who Came In From the Cold, wait a minute, and then read it again. It's not a
And of
long
course,
book.
you would
It's not.
never
That's not.
read. And of course, would you ever recommend Ian Fleming novels?
Well, for fun, purely for fun, but not right
Yeah.
away. Not to start with. No, God help us. You don't want to imprint a reader on Ian Fleming. No. No. But your video on how to read
Mhm.
difficult books raises the question of critical reading.
Mhm.
The difference between critical reading and what I suspect 90% of the people who do read do. I think 90% of the people who read don't read critically.
Mhm.
The people who fill out the time surveys, those surveys that we always see that say that the average person reads one book a year, two books a year, something
Mhm.
like that. You know that those surveys have to be real So there are a lot of readers out there who are that kind of reader. I don't know any of them, but you have to assume there are lots of them out there. And those readers, I am assuming, when they're reading their 1-2 books a year, they are not reading critically. I think there's a whole
Yeah.
batch of authors whose careers are built on the fact that that's the kind of book they can get away with writing. But when did that stop for you? Or was that ever true for you? Have you always read deeper than that, more critically than that?
I think something changed for me in high school when I decided to become a pretentious jerk. Um, but I think
I can't
in
get to them
actual,
all. I can't get everybody in time. Some people do.
but actually, I think what part of what happened was actually Orwell for me because I started
Oh,
reading
no.
Orwell's essays fairly quickly after reading Animal Farm in 1984, and because I became obsessed with Orwell for a little while um, in high
That's
school.
not a bad obsession to have. He won't let that down.
Yeah, yeah, of the, of people to become obsessed with, of the writers to become obsessed with, this is probably pretty good, and this meant that I started reading Orwell's essays a little bit early compared to, I think, what most people would kind of find. I meet so many people who are like, "Oh, I love Orwell. I love 1984," and just have no idea that actually his essays are arguably his real literary legacy, if you look at, like, the work he was most proud of and things. Um, but because of that, I think when you start reading literary essays or sort of these essays here, argumentative essays, you start wondering about the arguments behind them. You start trying to figure out what you believe as well. I mean, a lot of this was motivated by the fact that I was like a very politically minded high schooler who didn't know exactly what I believed. I just kind of had the sense that all of it really mattered. And Orwell was like one of my first ways that I tried to like take that seriously.
Yeah, yeah. The literary essays are the perfect place to do that. I'm thinking of his. I'm thinking not so much of how to shoot an elephant or anything like that as I am the literary stuff, just the deadline book reviews that he
Mhm.
wrote his whole life. And in those reviews are the longer literary essays that he wrote for giving speeches or for prefaces or whatnot. He often will disagree with other critics, so you're brought right into the fact that critical reading is often you're often disagreeing with other people by name.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
That
I
can be
mean,
very intoxicating. That is a
yes.
break with the young high school idea that there is some sort of adult orthodoxy.
Yeah, yeah, if you read politics in the English language early enough, you start suspecting that every writer is trying to hoodwink you, and that it's your job, like, to you have an obligation to not let them do it. Uh, and so that really can change the way you read those sorts of things, and it sort of puts you in, at least for me, a bit of a paranoid mindset at first, where I'm like, all of these people are trying to obscure their terrible arguments, um, and all of these people are just sophists. I didn't even know what the word sophist was at the time, but it turns out that's what they were. And so yeah. But overall, it was Orwell who probably did this for me early on. And then, of course, then I went and studied philosophy. Then I descended into the depths of hell, and you have to read critically there. It's the only thing that you can do, right? It's the only thing you're supposed to do when you're reading that stuff.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
I left a lot on the table there for you, Steve. You
Yes, you
you
did.
picked one.
Yes, you did indeed. But here is hardly the place for a rant about philosophy, especially since you sunk a lot of time into it.
That's
I'm
true.
kind of curious to know when you talk about your pretentious young awakening into political thought. I'm trying to pinpoint in time. If you were a dog, I would know exactly just by looking at you. But I'm trying to guess. Was this the Gulf War? The
It's not
beginning
the Gulf
of the
War,
Iraq
no.
War?
I kind of so I was 11 years old on 9/11. That
Oh,
helps
okay.
center
All
it
right.
a little bit there. The
Okay.
first
So
big political moment. So there's been a war going on ever since I can really remember,
right.
right? We've had nonstop war, but the first person I became sort of politically infatuated with, because I was going to be old enough to vote in that election, was Barack Obama. I was
Wow.
eight. I was eight. I was still 18 in high school. Or I was 18 that year, and so it was Barack. Yeah, it was Barack Obama's campaign that I think really kind of. And I remember I used to go on these. not weekend trips. Every Friday night for a while, my dad and I had this like ritual where we'd always drive to this bookstore, and we lived out kind of in the country, so it took us 30 minutes to get there. And we'd go just browse the bookstore for like an hour or two, and then drive back. Sometimes we wouldn't even buy anything, and we would have these huge political debates the whole time, right? And so and it was around that time that I started just like thinking about this stuff. Um, and so because I think people who weren't around for it don't quite remember how sort of intoxicating the sort of campaign, like Obama's first campaign was, and how like genuinely hopeful, like huge swaths of the population were, especially younger people,
Yeah.
because it was like a huge thing. So being 18 and like being that enthusiastic, yeah, it was a huge thing for me.
So you had fruitful, fun discussions with your father?
I did, yeah.
But what about Marcus? I don't understand then. What on earth? Aren't there a whole
Yeah,
bunch of
no,
videos on your channel about stoicism? Stoicism in the 21st century means I have a dodgy relationship with my father.
no, I have a very good relationship with my father, and one of the things that my parents often did, I will say this, the only exception to this was religion, where this was not okay, but in almost every other thing, I was allowed to express vocal disagreements, and it was just considered like a normal thing. It was also that my parents let me read whatever I wanted and all of this stuff. There was just sort of a baseline level of like religious belief that I had to maintain in order for the rest of it to be acceptable, right? That was kind of the idea. I grew up in like a Baptist household and we had this, but like if I wanted to talk about politics, if that's when I wanted to talk about, I did a book report my senior year of high school, like a video essay. I should have known that YouTube was going to be my career. We didn't know that YouTube was about the Communist Manifesto, a work I've soured on considerably comparatively, but at the time, you're 17 or whatever, and you think you've solved all the world's problems. And my dad was like horrified by the fact that I would talk about the Communist Manifesto like this, and yet he still like let me read it, and I had a copy. Still, he bought me Saul Alinsky's Rules for Radicals because that's what everyone was talking about because of Alinsky's connection to Obama. And I asked if I could buy it and read it, and he's like, "Yeah, sure, buy it and read it." Yeah. So there was always that kind of openness and about ideas.
But you mentioned, okay, so you mentioned you get to the point where you're reading these things, political polemics or whatever, and you start to think, wait a minute, are these guys all sophists? Are they all just using wordplay to hide their bad ideas? When did you reach the bottom of that? When did you come out? What did you end up deciding about that? About what to do about it? How to respond to it?
Yeah, I mean, actually, I think that in a lot of ways, my like whole outlook about this, the more I think, I've only recently kind of come to this realization how much of it was shaped by Orwell early on, which is that if you want to define Orwell's kind of views about politics and things, most of it is it's just hardline anti-authoritarianism, and he's willing to find authoritarianism in every corner, right? Right. And I was like, wow, everybody wants to control me. Like this is the view that I came to, and like that's why they write such bad arguments. That's why they do this. They're trying to manipulate you. This is the kind of view that I came to fairly early on, which I think in some ways is still kind of my default. People want to tell you what to do because they will benefit from that. Was roughly the kind of view at a fairly young age, and it's sort of been a guiding principle for a lot of my life.
How does that square with studying philosophy? Where
Well,
philosophers just want to tell you who's right and who's wrong in Judea, they want to tell you what the universe is like.
well, you get to, but in the best of philosophy, they actually state the arguments. Like they actually make the arguments clear, and you can contest them, right? And I think it was that contestability that was like what drew me to it. I'm going to be so earnest about philosophy for the rest of this conversation, Steve. You're going to vomit later.
Contestable. What on earth? Oh my god. Thoughts are a product of the human brain, and they have no effect on the universe other than what they make the human hands do.
But we're trying to figure out what the universe is like, right? And we use our minds to try to comprehend it, right?
Yeah,
And so we argue.
but our minds don't change what the universe is like. And that simple
Oh, I
sentence
agree
right
with that
there
part.
takes all of philosophy, the whole discipline of it, puts it on a boat and sets it adrift somewhere. and it never comes back. If we're lucky, it never comes back. So how on earth is the anyway? I promised I wasn't going to ask philosophy.
I keep dousing it every time we light it on fire. I keep getting my bucket, dousing it, hauling it back to shore.
You don't read a whole lot of philosophy nowadays, do you? I mean, you check in with Marcus from time to time. But
well, I do. Well, I mean, it depends on how we define philosophy. To give you the worst answer possible, but like I'm reading that Kolakowski book. There, I would call that a work of philosophy, even though it's like also intellectual history. I'm reading. Oh, geez, it's these Mac things. I'm reading. Um, I'm working on some stuff for a new channel project that I briefly alluded to for you. That's actually means I've been reading Marx again for the first time in a very, very long time, and reading. I have to stop the thumbs up. Reading companions to Marx and things like that. I would count that as philosophy. And then I haven't read as much of it as I thought I would by now, but occasionally I've been picking through that rise of Chinese thought, rise of modern Chinese thought, that book. But
bane of my
but I
existence
think
for an entire month.
but I think though that the problem is that I don't read philosophy for fun in the same way. I feel like I have to be at my desk, I have to open it up, I want to take notes. It's like effort. It does take effort in a way. And so much of my reading is me just grabbing my Kindle and sitting, finding myself in a place, sitting down and reading for 10 minutes, and then doing something and reading for another 10 minutes. And I don't read a lot of philosophy on my Kindle. My Kindle is almost always fiction or certain kinds of nonfiction, like history or something. For instance, Jennifer Burns just released a new not documentary, biography, and I have to go pick it up from the bookstore. So I'm not reading it on my Kindle. I'm reading a physical copy, but Jennifer Burns' new biography of Milton Friedman is coming out. So I'm
Yes, it's massive. It's gigantic.
yes, her Rand biography was slim, so I was a little surprised to see how big it is.
The parts of the Milton Friedman biography that were narrative, I thought were wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
A large part of it just went right by me like a train in the night because I do not understand the topics. She appears to understand the topics quite well, but
she's a very good historian. Though I noticed with the Rand stuff, she didn't talk about the philosophy in any detail. Now with Rand, that in part is because there isn't anything below the surface. Like it's there isn't much going on actually. And she really just stuck to the narrative of Rand's life, which ends up being a really fascinating story. With Friedman, you really do have to wrestle with those ideas, specifically because Friedman's ideas ended up being so influential on like world monetary policy.
I don't think I got a lot of it, but the impression I got is that the best possible explainer of Friedman's thought was Friedman himself. I think that's why he's so present in those parts of the book. But I have sent it off to my in-house expert. We'll see what he says. It won't be me, that's for sure. That's for sure. Although, what about Taylor's new revision of his biography of Orwell? Did that have any interest?
Oh yeah, I'm about halfway through it. It's just been sitting on my bedside, and I'll just read it a bit. The problem is if I'm gonna have a light on because like if my wife's going to bed or something like that, so it's got to be the right times. But I've been reading that, and I thought that's great. I don't read a ton of biographies, but now that I've been reading a few more, I think I'm going to read a lot more biographies in the future. And that's a great example of non-critical reading for me. I just read. I don't even have a pencil near me when I read that. I just read.
If you're in the right hands, yeah, it can be. How often do you go back to Orwell's literary essays? Or is that, let's just say it's essays.
Last month I listened to the majority. So I have them in physical form, digital form, and I have an audiobook of a collection of his essays. And so I often will go back to them. But like last month, for instance, I listened to 3 or 4 of them on audiobook form, just as I did chores and things. I listened to Politics in the English Language and Why I Write. Of course, I have to stop putting my thumb up because of the same. And then also The Lion and the Unicorn, which is one of the longer ones.
What about his actual deadline prose, his literary essays, his reviews?
Oh, his reviews. I don't read his reviews as much. It's one of those things that I probably should read. I think probably if I look at my audiobook version, that you won't find many of those. That you'll find a few on the audiobook. but they wouldn't. They just like wouldn't record them for some reason. But you do find a few. I think there's at least one about Dickens in that collection. I'd have to look though.
Yeah, I always wish that Penguin would come out with a big fat volume, something to match the size of their complete Montaigne. That would be wonderful for Orwell.
Yeah.
I can't believe
The,
that it wouldn't do well.
I think Everyman's Library has one of those. Has like a
Yeah,
big
they do.
fat
They
Orwell
have
essay collection. Yeah.
wish there were a big, big.
Penguin should do it. Yeah. Because I love those black spine penguins. I mean, they're probably my favorite way to buy big collections of work from
But
older authors.
remind me, you don't currently do much in the way of physical print and paper book shopping. Is that right?
Not a ton, not a ton. Except for when I'm doing. I mean, I really have to just keep a cap on it until we actually move. Except that when I'm doing that deep critical reading of stuff, I tend to do that's print and paper for me because notes are a lot easier. So taking underlining, I just have never gotten the full hang of taking notes on a Kindle or something. I can highlight on it, but it's just never been the same. But here's my dirty secret though, Steve. Often when I buy a book to take notes with it in physical form, I will then later on buy the digital copy so that I can control F it and search for things. So I often end up I often end up owning it in both forms, which is
Taking notes in
shameful.
digital on a digital book is so much better. You can access them all without flipping pages, without wondering where they are. You can call up your notes and then search for a particular word, find it. Bingo.
But the Kindle is but the Kindle is so slow to type. And you know, I had the Kindle Scribe, and I didn't like the handwriting function, so I sent it to you. uh,
I'm learning the handwriting function on it. I'm learning the handwriting function and also its sketching function. All of the different
hmm, okay.
palettes and tools that you can use for sketching. I'm slowly teaching myself how to like it. Oddly enough, the thing that I don't like about it on is reading. I am so accustomed
Because of this,
to a small reading screen by now
yeah, yeah.
that having a big page size thing feels weird. I don't know
I
why.
found that it actually slowed me down because when I'm trying to read faster, my eyes are like fixed on the center of the screen and they kind of just go down in this kind of like and with the I almost had to move my head to comfortably read the full
To read the larger
the
size.
large Kindles. Yeah. So read the
So
larger size. So I found that actually the big pages slowed me down.
okay, but to get back to critical reading, to get back to that feeling, you get old enough, you get self-aware enough to know that a lot of the stuff that you're reading is trying to manipulate you. And it's doing
Mhm.
that by suppressing good writing that contradicts it and lying.
Mhm.
What do you do with that? I mean, do you read anything in the popular, just written arena that might still do that? Do you read book review journals or even political journals like Foreign Affairs or National Review or anything like that? Do you read pieces that you could suspect have active polemic elements?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I used to make a joke that I was the only person in the world. This can't be true, but I was the only person in the world who had a print subscription to New Left Review and National Review, uh, uh, which are two journals that often do feel like they are actively lying to you. Uh, uh, um, um,
I don't
and
just
so I
feel that.
read a lot of others. I don't read as much of it lately. I think right now my only active subscription probably is digital, and it's to the Atlantic. Um, but I'm not sure. I had a New York Review of Books subscription as well, which I used to read because I thought that was how you had to keep apprised of like new books. But it turns out that they only cover like 6 books an issue because they want to write 5,000 words. You know,
Yeah.
so it's actually not a good way to learn about new books either. And you know, there's only so many essays that any man, even a man with a beard like mine, can read about Carl Nova Nausgaard, literary genius. Um, because it seemed like for a while it was every issue we had to have at least one
Well,
mention.
now it's John Fosse. Now we've moved to
Yes,
Norway.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Another great author that everybody's always read it. They've always thought he was great. I mean, good God, all the way back to 1960. Everybody that I knew who read books, of course, you must remember every conversation we had was about him. Well, I don't remember you mentioning him,
John,
thinking about him,
John,
alluding to him, or
John.
owning him at all until he won the Nobel
I see
Prize.
all this laudatory. I see all this laudatory praise about how John Fossa convinced me that God exists. I go, did he? Like,
Yeah,
well,
I don't get it.
there's only one writer who I can think of who clearly deserves the Nobel Prize, who I think is never going to get it. And I think you've mentioned this before in streams, which is Salman Rushdie.
Rushdie, I would certainly be someone who deserves it. I still have. I mean, his last book was an utter disaster, but I still have a soft spot in my heart for Ngugi wa Thiong'o, who I think is one of the, at least during the arc of his career, was one of the greatest writers alive. So I wouldn't mind him either. but yeah, Salman Rushdie. At least if Rushdie won,
Yeah.
or even if Murakami.
Yeah.
If Rushdie won or if Murakami won, then at least I wouldn't be blinded with rage over the literary world, the lit crit world's hypocrisy.
Because you know they've actually been reading him. You know they've read.
It's unbelievable that they've read Murakami all this time. I would believe that.
Yeah.
I would believe it even about Rushdie. But
yeah.
I don't believe it. I flatly don't believe it about most of the authors who win. I see it. I see the pieces that come out from literary people, from literati that I know. I know for a fact that they do not know these authors, that this has just been a hurried, comprehensive cram session in the New York Public Library.
Yeah.
Whereas
the problem is, but I don't think Rushdie would ever win, because I think, well, let's put it this way: he might win. If he wins, it's going to be very uncomfortable for some people. There's going to be a number of people who have to write some very uncomfortable essays.
Why don't you think he win?
Well, I think it's, well, maybe the committee would actually vote for him. I actually don't know exactly how they choose Nobel Prize winners for literature, at least. All I know is this: that when Salman Rushdie was literally almost murdered, people had a hard time saying it's bad that he was almost murdered. There was a shockingly large amount of the literary world which would not say it.
Yeah.
And if he wins, all the essays have to mention that fact.
Yeah, it was really weird to watch. It was weird to watch the reaction of the literary world when he had a death sentence put on him. And then you think, okay, well, the literary world has surely learned what constitutes the right side of an issue, what constitutes the wrong side of an issue. And then it happened again, to the same author in his one lifetime. It happened again. I understood. I thought I understood it the first time with the fatwa, because he's made a lot of enemies. He's a wonderful, warm guy, but he is also can be a jerk, like pretty much anybody else. I kind of understood it maybe the first time. Second time, no, not at all. The second time, I think that our age is being poisoned in its veins by whataboutism. I think that's just become such a fundamental poison that now it's people's default. I think a whole generation of school kids have been raised with that as their default mental position. No matter what you hear, no matter what it is, find some way to whataboutism it.
So you couldn't, it seemed like very few people were able to articulate the following position, which would have been an understandable position, which was Salman Rushdie does do things that offend large portions of the world. And Salman Rushdie is a prickly guy who can write polemics in a way that surely will rile people. But he should not be murdered for it. That seemed to be the key.
Yeah, you'd think. Well, obviously, as we know from recent world events, that kind of thing, X is wrong and Y is also wrong, that kind of thing is just gone. It's just, it seems completely gone from public discourse, which is astonishing.
Okay, so let me ask you this, Steve, to get us back on track here, which is, how much of your reading would you say is critical reading? Because you are actually a critic. So you actually have a reason to critically read.
Yeah. All of my reading is critical because once you start to do that, you never stop. if by critical reading we mean I am I am experiencing this book subjectively. I'm enjoying it. I'm thrilled by it. I'm annoyed by it. But I am also watching what it's doing as a book and what the author is doing as this latest step in his career. That second part is reading critically. I'm looking
Yeah.
at what this is doing as a book.
Hmm.
And in the case of like a book critic, I'm also looking at what this is doing in terms of the author's life. All
Yeah.
the previous things I've read by this author. If we call that, then I have long since lost the ability to turn that off. I don't, even if I'm reading some cheesy romance or a science fiction story that's not very good that I've read a million times, I'll still be doing that. There'll be a part of my reading brain that is still looking at that and saying, okay, but why are you doing this? The minute you ask why are you doing this to the author, you're
Yeah.
reading critically. And I don't
Yeah.
ever.
I kind of worry that I might lose that ability, the ability to not read critically, the ability to turn it off at some point, because I've been working on these videos that are like longer for this other channel project where I was reading, like, for instance, it started with the Ayn Rand thing. I wanted to do like a critical view of Ayn Rand. So I read the biography, I read some of her philosophy stuff. And then I was like, well, if I read Atlas Shrugged, I have to read it like a furtherance of her philosophy. Like, you have to wonder about the mechanics of it. How is she trying to spread a message here, right?
Mhm.
And once you start doing that to fiction, something really changes inside of me.
Something really
inside of me.
changes inside of you. But I would argue that even if you did lose that ability to read without doing that, you're not losing anything. You're not losing anything valuable. The
Yeah.
typical way that people characterize reading critically is, oh, you're taking all the fun out of it, and I've never known that to be
Oh, I don't
true.
think that's true. Yeah. Yeah.
So
I don't
why
think that's
would
true.
anybody want to preserve the ability to read a non-critically? Why would anybody want to preserve that? I don't know.
So
I've never understood.
here's the best argument I could think of for it. And it just goes like this. Um, Reading critically takes more time and more work, at least at first. It slows you down, and it does often seem to take you out of the experience of just, like, enjoying the book as you read, but you get a new kind of enjoyment. You get you get this other enjoyment on top of it, but it would be like, if you don't have a reason to move to, like, sort of the critical lens as you read, then why do it, right? It's just more work. What's the benefit, for you, unless you have, like, a reason? You do it because you're a professional critic. I do it because I'm trying to write these scripts about these books. But some people, for them, reading is just escapism, and that's fine. I think that's actually a fine thing for their reading to be. And
Well,
so
yeah, but
to
are
think
they
critically about it,
incompatible? Are they incompatible? I've
maybe.
never known that to be true. I'm absolutely thrilled
Interesting.
by scenes in books without and while also looking at what they're doing. How is this actually
Yeah,
here? What is this actually doing on the page? They can
yeah.
still thrill me, or in
We
most
have to be
cases,
careful.
avoid me.
We have to be careful for generalizing from your experience. We can generalize from my experience all we want, but you were raised by four-legged beast and have and haven't slept in 72 years. So so we have to just be careful.
It's true that I was. It's true that my earliest socialization did not involve books, and most people's does. So when they get, you know, so maybe they're not as ready to look at books as things that are doing things.
Mm,
Instead, books are something else. They're something organic that
yeah,
they live in the world anyway. They're friends almost, or enemies,
yeah,
or
yeah, yeah,
heart attacks, or something like that. Whereas, but not they're not things. They're not things that are out there.
yeah, yeah.
You just have to look at the way you would look at a bag of rice or uh, a do-it-yourself kit of some kind. But I'd like to think that I wouldn't be vilifying my childhood playmates. I had the best childhood playmates anyone could ever want. they just
Yeah,
they
I'm
weren't
sure.
literate. That's all.
Okay, so here's maybe a question then. I don't think reading critically takes away from enjoyment overall. I still love reading even though when I read critically and things like this. But does it take away from a kind of romance that you have towards books? Does it take away from that kind of affection you might have towards books?
What would
Instead,
the
you start
romance
viewing them.
be?
I don't know.
What
It's
is
the
the
same
romance?
kind of it's the same kind of way that people have like a romantic attachment to paper books, right? They have this like, oh, I just love the way they feel and they smell and things like this, and it just makes them feel good. Like it's just like they have this like affective response, and for some people, that's just like the experience they have with books. Where I pick up a book and I tried to kind of get over any of those kind of romantic attachments to just be like, no, this is a book that's doing something. I think that's a good way of putting it. This is a book that's doing something, and you can do something with it. Um, while still saying that that's a fine way to it's not like devaluing it or something. I think a lot of people would hear that what I just said and maybe say you're devaluing the books. You're not I don't know, Steve. My thoughts are incoherent, perhaps.
No,
So
a romantic attachment to anything or anyone is a bad idea. Romance is, in that context, is a euphemism that we use for there's a large part of what's in front of me that I'm intentionally going to ignore. And that's always a bad idea. That is always a bad idea, whether it's a loved one or a sex partner or a book or a piece of music. It's always a bad idea to look at something and say, well, I'm going to have a romantic relationship with this thing. So all those parts of it, I'm going to ignore. Because those are
yeah,
the
yeah,
parts that are
yeah.
going to come back and bite you. Right. But that could be
Yeah.
the ultimate South Boston Irish Catholic view of things. That might be the ultimate distillation of South Boston Irish Catholic views, which is there's no romance, kid.
Yeah, 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 yeah. So far in this chat, we've talked about I've said that everyone is out to get you, and that everyone is trying to manipulate you anytime you read anything. You've said there's no romance. This is the
Yes,
bleakest conversation we've ever had.
yes, absolutely. Come right up. Warm yourself by the fire of our chat. I don't. I just think it's a bad idea. A romantic view of anything seems to me to be to the person saying it feels better for me to view only part of this thing and to view it in a nice, cozy way. So that's what I'm going to do. So I'm going to
Do
if
you
I
think though? Do you think that learning to read critically in the way that I described in my video itself, though, can become a kind of romance where people are ignoring other parts of the book, and they're
it can
doing it
become a kind
because
of
it gives them a sense of satisfaction, and they're actually
it can
engaging
become
in
kind of
self-deceit.
it can be a fetish if to the limited extent that fetish and romance are different things. It can become a fetish. Definitely, I've seen people take critical evaluation way too far. They are insufferable
Mhm,
to be around when they do that. It can become that, but no, I don't think it limits your wonder at all.
mhm.
The romance of books, the same thing. You mentioned people who go on and on about how wonderful books smell. I don't know when it started, but now my instinctive reaction when I hear someone go on about how wonderful books smell is this person does not read.
Oh,
I know
interesting.
that's an exaggeration. That is probably an exaggeration. But if you are going on and on about the way your books smell, you are looking at them through a romantic lens. It's always been my experience that if you have a relatively new acquaintance in your life, you've known them for only 3 months, and you say, "I really love this person," then you will notice if they kick their dog. If you say, "I'm in love with this person," you won't notice if they kick their dog. They're still kicking their dog either way, but it's a
Mhm.
way to look at it. If the romance side of it will blind you to things. I mean,
Interesting,
how
yeah.
else to explain the rapturous praise of Sally Rooney than people who are reading her books with one eye closed? How else to
Mm,
explain that?
mm.
Then how
And you think that maybe do you think that also is at work with Cormac McCarthy?
Cormac McCarthy, absolutely. Carl Ove Narsgaard, absolutely. It's at work.
Yeah, yeah.
You're reading if you're reading his work and you're deciding already, well, okay, this guy's written an 8-volume set of navel gazing, and it's going to be a lot of time, and there's no good prose in it, but it will sure as hell validate my own tobacco addiction. So it's worth it to me. I'm going to ignore all the rest of
I
it. Just look at that part.
yeah, yeah. I only read the first 2 volumes of Nausgaard's books. I would say that when I was reading them, I was in college, and they did make me feel like I should do more introspecting in a way that would, like, write this, like, in a probably a very negative way. I feel like this I could use these to rationalize being an even bigger jerk. Uh, I'll have you know, Steve, you might be happy to hear this. I was recently rethinking my top 10 books list,
Oh, do
and
tell.
I think there was one book that I sort of really enjoyed reading when I read it. I did really enjoy it. I know you will disagree with this. I think I would take Blood Meridian off of that top 10, even though it was like number 4 or something. I think I was like, I had just read it. I really enjoyed it. And now the more I've thought about it, actually, the less I liked it. And so it's one of those things, which goes back to a very early chat you and I had, which is like how much of it is just like time. You recently read something and enjoyed it, so you put it in your list, right? I think with Cormac McCarthy that might have happened. I don't think that way about The Road, for instance. I still think The Road is very good. So, but my assessment of The Road has remained relatively stable for 5 years or so.
But my videos, I did a 4-part dissection of how The Road is not good. You could say that you like
I've never
it,
watched it.
sure, but
I've never watched those videos. There's just too many.
They
I
are
can't go through your whole back catalog.
the criticisms in those videos are unanswerable. They remove the ability of any intelligent person to say this book is good. They don't do anything to say whether or not you can say that you liked it. But the book is certainly not good. It is certainly not. You should go and watch those videos. They are a masterpiece of how to dissect a book.
Yeah. Okay. I'll do this. You know, there's so much to read and there's so much to watch.
I'll send you the links.
But-
It'll be nice and convenient.
So do you think? I kind of wonder though about this view about critical reading, along with your sort of hatred of philosophy, because
Yeah.
I would think that I would want to say that like critical reading and philosophy go hand in hand. So even if
No,
you're not reading a
absolutely.
philosophy book while
They
you're
aren't
doing
even
this critical
remotely
reading,
associated with each other.
you're still doing philosophy.
No.
What I actually think, Steve, is that you yourself are a philosopher.
No. No.
I think you are a philosopher, sort of, who in denial. Hello, Frida. Hello, Frida.
No.
I was hoping
No.
I was hoping my little bee would jump up here so you could see her too. But yeah, Steve Donahue, philosopher.
No. 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 Look at any major work philosophy. Anyone. Let's rule out the things where you have the slightest question mark. I, for instance, would not call the Meditations of Marcus Aurelius a work of philosophy. I also wouldn't call Walden Pond a work of philosophy. If we rule out the ones that are there where there's any question, and stick to monstrosities like being and nothingness.
Mm-hmm.
There is nothing there at all. There is no actual content there at all. So naturally, it is completely antithetical to critical reading. There's nothing in it at all. If at any point in a 1,000,000-page book, you can sit down and say, okay, but what did that last paragraph mean? What did that last section mean? What's this whole book meant so far? If the answer, you ask that question and the answer in meaning and nothing is nothing, it meant nothing at all, it doesn't have a meaning, it's just the author playing word games, well, then that's the ultimate repulsion of critical reading. Yeah. Philosophy is all thinking. It's all the romantic lens of thinking
what about
change the universe. They can't. You're a primate.
What about the great writer who I've never heard someone put in their top 5 writers ever until I heard about you, Erasmus. Erasmus wrote a book on free will.
You're not going to say he's a philosopher.
Erasmus is certainly a philosopher. He is certainly a philosopher. I think what you're doing, Steve, is you are dividing the world into. What you do is you find the bad examples of philosophers and you say those are the philosophers, and any of the philosophers who are good, you're like, there's something else.
But you don't think the author, or you don't think being in nothingness is bad.
No, I actually don't like being in nothingness. I don't like being in nothingness.
You know as well as I do, since we both talked to him, that somewhere out in the world, Jimmy Nuts is begging screaming at the screen, saying, "Tell him he's moving the goalpost. Tell him he's moving the goalpost."
Yeah.
He wants you to say that so bad.
You're moving the goalpost, Steve. You're moving the goalpost. And Erasmus, a philosopher, wrote In Praise of Folly, of all things.
In Praise of Folly is not a work of philosophy. It's
but
completely grounded in the real observable world, as is everything that he wrote. Even the Enchiridion.
Erasmus wrote a book on free will. He wrote a book on free will. De libero arbiter. Yeah, I'm not even gonna.
It was completely grounded in the real world. It was completely grounded in arguing with Martin Luther.
Do you think
it was grounded in what he considered the real world? He thought that religious texts bounded the real world. He
Yeah.
would
What about
if
what
you
about what
if you're writing about intellectual concepts, he'd have been furious.
what about someone like what about someone like Seneca? Do you think Seneca's a philosopher? Do you think Seneca's worth reading? I actually don't know what your view of Seneca is.
He's worth reading, and he's certainly a philosopher in a way because he's propounding a worldview. I would argue that what he's doing is largely grounded in the real world. Whereas, take someone like, for instance, Wittgenstein. He's not grounded in the real world. His books are not
Mhm.
grounded in the real world. Immanuel Kant, these books are not grounded in the real world. They are the legendarium of Tolkien taken away from Arda. So they're the music of they don't
I'm sorry. I'm
attach to
sorry.
anything. They're just the
I'm sorry,
author.
Steve. Steve, there's something behind you. There's these goalposts that are shifting.
No, no. You're just
I thought
trying
it
to
was a
kick
play, a
up and
trick.
give me nuts. That's
Thought,
all.
I thought it was a trick of the camera. But man,
No,
they've moved from one side of the field to the other.
you know exactly the kind of work I'm talking about. You know the
I
kind of
thought
philosophers I'm talking about.
I don't even think it's moving the goalpost, Steve. I think it's like I thought we were playing soccer. You've picked the ball up and declared we're playing rugby.
How can you say that Erasmus is a philosopher? There's no way you can do that. Unless,
I
are you
think
saying
that's
that anyone who delves in theology is doing philosophy?
well, a lot of them, not all of them, but a lot of them. Yeah, yeah.
No, no. If anyone's moving the goalposts, it's you, bub. Because every time I bring up a gigantic, woolly, massively bearded, incomprehensible, impenetrably bad professional philosopher, you say, "Oh, I've never really liked. I never really liked that
No,
at
no,
all."
no, no, no. Here, I'll list some philosophers for you so that I know so that you can pick on me for the right stuff, right? So I don't
Are
like
you a
being in
fan of
nothingness.
After? Are you a fan of After
I
Virtue?
am I'm a huge fan of After Virtue. It's in my top 10 books. I love that book. I love his book Whose Justice, Which Rationality as well. And um I love Heidegger. Actually, I think Being in Time is a fantastic book. I think Being in Time is great. Um, I really like David Hume and Aristotle. Yeah, and with Aristotle, with Aristotle, you might be able to make an argument that by your definition, Aristotle's not a philosopher, because you could make this argument that Aristotle's trying to build everything out of his biology. Like he starts with like biology, and then everything else just kind of like flows from it. But yeah, so there's a couple of philosophers there for you right there: Hume, Heidegger, Aristotle, McIntyre. All four of those. No, Heidegger's not my top 10 philosophy books, but yeah, all of those made it. You know. Um, I think of, and there are theologians I like who I think are dipping into the philosophical, Callistos Ware, for instance, or someone like that. So yeah, I'm not moving the goalpost. I've planted them firmly. I have my sledgehammer and I'm driving them firmly into the turf so that they cannot be moved,
Have
no
you
matter how
noticed?
much wind you blow.
Yeah, don't underestimate how much wind I can blow. It's quite a bit. Have you found that reading these people, let's say the people on your list, pushes you, drives you to read about their time or about works of biography of them? Does that ever happen?
Well, with some of them, I've thought about reading a Hume biography, but I never have gotten around to it. Um, with Aristotle, the problem is kind of just that I'm always a little skeptical about biographies written about ancient figures because I would just wonder how much of it is just filling in the gaps.
Yeah.
Like there's so many gaps that you like a lot of it gets filled in, right? There's a new biography of Marcus Aurelius coming out, and and with him, it's at least going to be better documented than Aristotle. But with Aristotle, it just would strike me as very hard
Yeah.
uh, to write a biography. With Heidegger, I have a I prefer not to delve into the personal life of Heidegger too much because there are some questions. I was early in graduate school when the Black Notebooks started being released, which might have firmly cemented the idea that Heidegger was not he was not a reluctant chair of a university during the Nazi regime and things like this.
No, you
So
pin a
that
lot on his reluctance, and then you find it's not there at all. There isn't any
Yeah,
reluctance.
yeah, yeah, exactly, and this is actually sadly a fact here with a philosopher who's huge for the kind of work that I used to do, Gottlob Frege. When as soon as people found his notebooks, um, he had a lot of let's call them very German opinions at the time, uh, um, like this. But for instance, I have been meaning to read um, that Hegel biography by I think it's Pinkert who wrote that. Yeah. So I would love to.
Did you
Or was
read
it
the
Penman's?
big fat Marcus Aurelius biography from like 10 years ago by Frank McLean?
No, no, I never read that. For a long time, I thought that it was actually bad to read the biographies of philosophers because I thought that it would taint their work.
I know a lot of
That you
people
would,
who feel that way about literary biographies. They don't want to read biographies of
yeah,
authors.
yeah.
I've
I,
always
I I
found
don't
that
believe
really.
this. I don't believe it anymore. But I'm just saying that I used to think this, and so any biographies that I've read, like literary biographies I've read, and things like this, or philosophical biographies, would have been really recently, and so I just haven't read a ton of them. Um, But
Well,
actually, it was reading that Burns biography of Rand, which I was doing purely instrumentally for a project. I was like, wow, a literary biography, even of a figure I severely dislike, can be very good.
oh yeah, they can be wonderful, absolutely
And
wonderful.
so and so that
Depends
convinced me.
entirely on the
And
biography.
Burns is such a great example of it because she's also an academic and she's writing like an academic work that's also a biography. It's very readable, but it's very well informed. She has a whole postscript about her archival work and about how the people at the Ayn Rand Institute keep futzing with the archives. So you can't actually quote them correctly and stuff. And so it's great. She was bringing a really nice critical eye. And then DJ Taylor's book, like I said, of Orwell has like totally that's such a brilliant biography. It's so engrossing when you read it. And I love the little interludes in Taylor's book where he'll just have a few pages about Orwell's voice, because we have like two recordings of Orwell's voice at all, right?
Yeah.
Or Orwell's face because it changed so much throughout his life, like these sorts of things. It's great. Taylor's book is just astounding. We're so lucky to have a biography like that.
Well, now I want to send you the Frank McGlynn Marcus Aurelius, but you're moving. So I
I
don't know
am
whether to
moving
send you
at
books or
some point.
not.
No, no more books right now. We have the kids' books you sent us, which are great, which are wonderful. But I think for now we have to say no more books for a while because the kid is now sitting up on his own, or at least can sometimes do it, which means he's close to crawling, which means he's close to walking, and we have this hard deadline where we want to be out of this place and in a new place before he's walking. So we have to really pick up the pace in the new year, I think.
All the young parents that I've known remember vividly the Brian De Palma chamber of horrors that resulted once the child could move on its own. All of a sudden, there are all sorts of variables introduced when they can crawl. An old friend of mine said years and years ago, said, you don't seem to understand because I said, it's a tiny little baby. What difference does it make if they can crawl? And he said, you don't seem to understand. One day they sit up. The next day they crawl across the floor. And the day after that, they crawl to Cincinnati. I know.
Yeah, yeah. And they babies have this thing they learn about the world by putting things in their mouths, and and that's fine when you can strictly control their environment, which is just a round rug, and you put only things there that would be fine. But when they just start, I was just walking around our apartment the other day, and I found a random screw that fell out of the hinge of a door. Well, I have a baby now, so as soon as he can crawl, I've
Yeah.
just killed my baby, right?
Yeah.
So I have to fix that. So you can't send me any books for a little while until we move to a new place, and then I'm going to build out in a room a library slash studio slash writing space where it will be like my YouTube, my writing,
Oh
my
my.
my real reading place, and I'm so looking forward to that. I'm going to build all the shelves myself, and we're just going to line the room, and so I can fill it up with as many books as you want to send me.
Oh my.
And some of them might
Everybody
even
should
be
have a
works of
room like that.
philosophy.
Everybody should have a room like that.
Yes, I think I used to
Always,
have one here. I mean, I
it's
had
not a freestanding room. It should be a space like that.
yeah.
I, I,
I gave that up when we had the kid because we live in a smaller apartment right now, so we needed a space for him, and I was happy to do it. But I felt the difference. I feel the lack of it, right? And I don't want that.
yeah, that's not
I want that.
Orwell. I believe that's absolutely true. A space. I mean, I hate to say it on my own channel. Well, I'm on my channel all the time. I often hate to say it because a lot of the people who watch my videos are undergraduates in dorm rooms. So they
Mhm.
don't have during the course of the school year, they don't have the ability to make that space. They just don't. And that's a shame. I don't want to be taunting people like that. If you're at home, you certainly should make that space. And it's possible to do. You spend $25 on one of those 6-foot tall room dividers, even if you don't have a room of your own.
Yeah, because currently I have a little desk in our bedroom, which is fine, but I hate actually working in my bedroom. I want a separate room, which I understand is me saying I want to be able to, I can afford a place where I will have a separate room and stuff. But like, yeah, that's the thing I want the most. I want like an office space in my room, but not even an office, a reading sanctuary, a place with a good chair to read, a comfortable place to put my computer where I can write, where it's a good level, and a place where I can browse my own books, where it's a curated collection. Not every book I've ever bought, because I get rid of a lot of them, but the books that I love, that when I just want to read something, I can look around my shelves, pull something off the shelf, and enjoy myself in the evening.
It's a refrain from a lot of Italian Renaissance humanists. It's not just the big names that say this. It's a refrain running through all their letters when they have a room like that. How much they treasure it. How much they treasure it. And you brought up Erasmus. I still can't believe that you brought up Erasmus to call him a philosopher. But one of the things that he used to bemoan all the time is how little of that he had, because he was itinerant for so much of his life, so he couldn't do it.
Yeah.
Although there were long periods where he could. It's always touching when you read someone's account in a letter about how I shut the whole world out when I closed that door, and suddenly I'm surrounded by shelves of my oldest friends. They're always there. But rather awkward segue here. The one living friend in this room needs to go to the bathroom. I'm afraid I need to cut this short, because the baby bean is she's been acting up for 15 minutes. I think she wants to get one.
Take care of her needs. But
She
thank you
likes
for
to
chatting with me, Steve.
She likes to walk in before sundown. She doesn't like the dark at all.
Oh yeah.
And she can't handle it either. She has worse night vision than anyone I've ever met, including any human that I've ever met. The smallest thing, she jumps at shadows. They're not pleasant at all for her to be out in the dark, so she starts to notice when the sun is going down. But I can't even remember. This video has been one long psychodrama. What did we even talk about? I don't know. I don't know what we talked about.
We were supposed to talk about reading critically, just reading in general, books, these sorts of things. But I mean, as always with you, Steve, I just can't keep you on track.
Well, next time maybe we can talk about something explosive.
We'll consider it. Let me say one last little final point, Steve, before you leave, and you can cut me off mid-sentence in the recording if you'd like. But I think this was a great example of when friends are comfortable talking to each other, they can make fun of each other while they do it, and it's meant very well. Right?
The only mystery that is absolutely true. That is the foremost gem of being someone's friend. The only mystery I have on that subject when it comes to you is that usually you have to ease into that, and you and I knew that in instance. We knew it instantly. I don't know why that happened. I don't understand that. I get that with dogs, but I don't ever get that with humans.
Yeah. The first email you sent me, you said, "I think we would be ideological enemies," and I laughed when I read it. So it just
the only reason I wrote it is I was laughing when I wrote it, because ideological enemies. Well, so what? which that is the right way. It is. Yes, absolutely. The foremost benefit of being someone's friend is that you can tell them they're moving the goalposts. You made your precious Jimmy Nuts very happy when you said that about me, but it's not true. Absolutely not true. And why is it not true? Because of rule number 1. Steve is always right.
Oh, I thought rule number 1 was don't send me books. But okay, listen, I guess I
rule number 1 on my channel is don't send me books. I'll either have it or I won't want it. Rule number 2 is Steve is always right. And rule number 3, as of today, is Jared's always wrong. That's nice and neat. That works just fine for me.
We bumped "Send Me Your Tech" off the list to put Jared is always right. All right, Steve. All right, you gotta take care of a dog. We gotta.
We'll talk again.